If you're like me and have watched a lot of the, I guess, murder mystery type cop shows, quite often people will say, "Oh, he was a horrible man. I'm glad he's dead. I'd like to congratulate the guy that did it, but it wasn't me." And people can get away with saying that to the police because it's not a crime in our society to hate somebody, just to kill them. Now, we have to look at how it is in God's kingdom, though. And that's not how it works. In God's kingdom, it's not only against the law to murder, but it's against the law just to stay angry with someone. And that's the kind of radical ideas that Jesus was teaching his followers in the Sermon on the Mount. Last week we began a new part on the Sermon on the Mount. We'd finished the Beatitudes. Jesus was telling his followers that being forgiven doesn't mean we can live a life of lawlessness. In fact, as the king of the kingdom, Jesus heightens the requirements of the law. So he tells us that what the law really means. So he's not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of it. So we finished last week with Jesus' statement, your righteousness must surpass that of the Pharisees. And they were, of course, the most careful, righteous people of the day. So I'm sure his followers kind of had to stop and wonder about, is it possible to even live up to their standards, much less be more righteous? But what Jesus meant was that although the Pharisees were concerned with obeying the external requirements of the law, they followed it in a very legalistic, kind of wooden, joyless way. Jesus called them actors because they cared very little about whether they were doing what God wanted. They were concerned about doing exactly the wording he said, to the point that they actually added a lot of things to it. And a lot of those were actually in opposition to what God wanted. And so Jesus was telling his disciples what the true meaning of the law is to honor God, and not just with our actions, but also with our thoughts, our motives, and our attitudes. So the kingdom code or the kingdom law is deeper and more personal than the law of any country, because it delves into the innermost parts of a man that no other man can judge and only God can know. So what followed that part in when he was talking about the Pharisees and all is 6 comparisons between external performance of the law and internal obedience to the law. Jesus was dealing with anger, lust, divorce, lying, revenge, and hatred. In each case, he calls us his followers to commit ourselves to not just obey the external requirements of the law, but also to allow the kingdom code to govern our thoughts, our motives, and our attitudes. So today we'll begin with the first of the 6 contrasts as Jesus teaches about it, which is unresolved anger. So in Matthew 5:21, he said, "Ye have heard that it was said by them of old, thou shalt not kill, and whoever shall kill shall be in danger of judgment." Now the first part of it, what he's referring to from the Old Testament. You've heard it said by them of old. But the second part was what the rabbis taught, and that was that, they say you shall be in danger of judgment, and that judgment was actually the death penalty in that day. But he goes on in verse 22, says, "But I say unto you that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of judgment." Now, anger is an internal heart issue, but it's also sin, and it'll also bring God's judgment. And we start hearing a lot more about hate crimes and the like, but It's pretty hard for man to judge what another person's motives were in things, whether it's truly a hate crime. But that's not a problem for God. He sees our hearts. There's a couple of misunderstandings about the verse. It's not saying that anger is the same as murder or just as bad as murder. Just for the record, if any of you are mad at me, I'd much prefer that than you try to kill me. Just to say. And it's not saying that anger itself is a sin. From other passages, we know that Jesus himself was sometimes angry, and that we can be angry without sinning. So anger, is initially a response, not a choice. We probably respond with anger so often because we are fallen man. And so in that sense, even an internal anger is a sin because it's our fallen nature. But it's not a sin in the sense of a choice that I made to disobey God. When it first strikes, I think anger is more of a temptation to sin. And that's it's what we choose to do with anger and what we choose to do because of anger that makes it sin. So as we'll see from later verses, it's unresolved anger that is sinful. One of the main reasons is because it leads to sinful actions. Jesus continued in verse 22 and said, "Whosoever shall say to his brother, Raka, shall be in danger of the council. But whosoever shall say, thou fool, shall be in danger of hellfire." Now, Raka and fool are both insults. Raka, which I can't roll my R's like they do, so it doesn't sound quite right, but it meant empty-headed. And fool in Greek was basically the word moron. Actually, the proper pronunciation, it kind of sounds almost more like you're spitting at them. But, yeah. So when we're angry, I can't even talk. When we're angry, we really want to say something nasty to people who make us angry. Jesus says that's a sin. Now, when in this part where Jesus was saying, those that say thou fool shall be in danger of hellfire, he actually used the word Gehenna. And Gehenna was a trash heap outside the city that was constantly burning, and that's actually where they'd throw the bodies of criminals after they were killed. And that came to symbolize hell, because it was a continual fire. So he doesn't mean that if you call someone a fool, that you're going to hell. He means that is a sin, and sin deserves hell. So if Jesus hadn't paid for our sin, that's what we would deserve. Not just for murder, but even for speaking insults. So why does God take it so seriously? Because in our anger, we lose sight of the person that God loves. Now we can notice the structure in that verse. It says, you have heard, and then any man that murders, and that's dealing with man. And he says, but I tell you, so he's given us something new. He says, anyone who is angry, and that's dealing with God. And again, you have heard, and anyone that says Raka, and basically that was referring to being taken before the human courts. And he says, but again, I tell you something new. Anybody that says a fool or anyone who says an insult has to answer to God. So there's two sets, kind of you heard X, but I say Y. So he's extending the culpability from action to emotion. He extends the judgment from human to divine. So before we move on, we can examine what else the New Testament says about anger. Ephesians 4:26 and 27 says, be ye angry and sin not. Let not the sun go down on your wrath, neither give place to evil or to the devil. Colossians 3:8 It says, but now ye also put off all these, anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy communication out of your mouth. And 1 Timothy 2:8 says, I will therefore that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. And then James 1:19 and 20 says, wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. Now, reconciliation is an important part of that. And so Jesus went on in Matthew 5, verses 23 and 24, says, therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave there thy gift before the altar, and go thy way. First be reconciled to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift. And the word reconciliation means to change thoroughly. So this verse shows the importance of reconciliation. It's important enough to interrupt worship of God, maybe because unresolved conflict does interfere with our ability to worship God. Notice where the initiative is on the one who has sinned against someone else. The guilty party should take initiative to resolve the conflict with his brother. And that's interesting because it's the other person who's probably angry. So it says don't even stop to worship when you know that your sin has caused a brother or sister to be angry. Seek them out, apologize, ask for their forgiveness, and seek to reconcile the relationship. So the responsibility to seek reconciliation doesn't rest with only the offended party, but later in Matthew, Jesus does give instruction to the party that has been offended, and such as probably angry. In Matthew 18, verses 15 through 17, it says, moreover, if thy brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. If he shall hear thee, thou hast gained thy brother. But if he will not hear thee, then take with thee one or two more, that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And if he shall neglect to hear then, tell it unto the church. But if he neglect to hear the church, let him be unto thee as a heathen man and a publican. So really, both parties are responsible to come together and to patch things up as far as possible, and to be able to agree on what's done, what was wrong, and from each side to take responsibility for whatever they contributed to the conflict. And that's usually the last thing we want to do. It's hard. It is hard work, but it's very important. More important, Jesus says, than getting to worship service on time. Not only to reconcile, not only is reconciliation important, it's also urgent. In this section, Jesus gives a mini parable to teach us that the business of reconciliation is urgent. Verses 25 and 26 of Matthew 5. He says, agree with thine adversary quickly while thou art on the way with him, lest at any time the adversary deliver thee to the judge, and the judge deliver thee to the officer, and thou be cast into prison. Verily I say unto you, thou shalt by no means come out thence until thou hast paid the uttermost farthing. And surely Jesus' example extends beyond just the situation of 2 men going to court. He's using that example to illustrate a broader principle. So if we continue to hold anger in our heart, or if we have sinned against a brother and not even tried to patch things up, then we're asking for it. There are consequences for leaving these things unresolved. And reconciliation is urgent so that we can avoid these consequences. So if we've sinned against a brother, God will not send you to hell for it. That's not what he means. But he will lovingly discipline to capture your attention and bring you to repentance, which is Godward, and reconciliation, which is toward people. So God will tap you on the shoulder with a stick to get your attention. If you don't get it the first time, he'll bring a bigger stick. So be reconciled now before God goes and gets the big stick. And there's some practical advice to deal with anger. And I'm close today with some advice on dealing with anger. And it's not explicitly from the Bible, and I'm not a psychologist. Might need one, but I'm not one. But here are some practical things I've learned about trying not to sin when I'm angry. Anger is an alarm. It's a warning light, and we have to treat it as such. So when the warning light goes off, we've got to find out what's setting it off. Sometimes it's somebody else or something they've done, an injustice or a personal attack. But like all warning systems, we have false alarms. We can be angry even when we haven't been wronged. Sometimes we make assumptions or something's just inconvenient. So we have to commit ourselves to not allow anger to either act or speak. You've probably heard the story about the guy that set up a shotgun tripwire for a burglar alarm on his front door. Well, that's got some pretty dire circumstances. We need to... What's that? Oh yeah. We want an alarm with a little less dire consequences. But quite often, when we get mad, our words are like that shotgun. So in anger, we say things and do things that we wouldn't say or do if we were thinking rationally. So we can't let anger control us. We have to exercise self-control, which is one of the fruits of the Spirit. Now, most of the time, that means waiting. When I'm mad, it's not a time to try to deal with a problem, but anger will pass. So we can wait a little bit, let our emotions calm down, take a few deep breaths, get some perspective, and let the emotional part of our anger dissipate so that we can think about both the situation and our response more objectively and rationally. And I think that sometimes things bother me that are best left ignored. If you bring up every little thing that bothers you or makes you angry, then you'll constantly have some conflict to resolve. And life's about more than just conflict resolution. If you're married, you probably either discovered this principle or had lived in constant conflict. Yeah. They say opposite attracts. And that means that usually your husband or wife is basically designed by God to drive you crazy. So rather than bring up every little thing that bothers you, you got to think that sometimes you can apply automatic forgiveness and just ignore it.
I like that.
Yeah. So you can kind of put that anger in the big box called grace and put it away in the closet where it won't get in the way of your relationship. And so when you find yourself angry, ask yourself, can I just overlook this? If you can, put it in the box called grace and put it away. Don't let it tear down your relationship. Now, sometimes anger is too big to fit in the box called grace. Sometimes even though you fit it in there and stuff it inside, put the lid on the box, lid keeps popping off, and there comes anger right in the middle of the living room floor again. And so when you talk, so you need to sometimes talk or take an effort. I should probably just look at my notes. What I'm talking about is in sometimes our effort to overlook an offense and let go of anger sometimes doesn't work so well. We find ourselves still angry or angry again, and probably means we should take action. And that doesn't mean to kill the person. Just say, well, as tempting as that may be. I mean, talk to them. Take the initiative and speak with them, and do it right away. And if the anger is keeps popping back out, then you need to act. But you need to be as calm as you can. You don't want to attack. Just explain. Take responsibility for your own actions. Everything that you did to contribute to the conflict, which in my case is usually about 99% of it. Take your responsibility for your own beliefs and feelings. You don't want to address it as you made me angry. Try saying something more like, I believe that what you did was not right, or I felt angry when you did that. And then you have to be willing to listen, because you may have missed something that may be just a huge misunderstanding. So it's good to be open as possible to hear the other person's perspective. And hopefully, as you approach the person with prayer and with a loving attitude, they will respond. Of course, there's always a chance that they won't listen to you, or will respond, or won't respond in a good way. But whether they respond in repentance or whether they respond in stubbornly doing the same thing again, there's only one healthy thing we can do, and that's to forgive. So a lot of times we think of forgiveness as what we're supposed to do when someone else apologizes. But the truth is that forgiveness is a one-party transaction. Even if someone is blatantly and stubbornly sinning against us, the very best thing we can do about it is to forgive them. And somehow we get it in our head that if I hold on and won't forgive, now they're really going to stick it to them. They're really going to feel the pain. But when we don't forgive, it won't teach them anything. It doesn't hurt the other person at all. We only hurt ourselves. And the more we indulge our anger, the more it consumes us, distorts our perception or perspective on all of life, ruins our relationships, eats away at our health, and turns us into bitter old men and women. Unresolved anger is a sin. And like all sin, it destroys us. The reason God tells us to stay away from sin is because He doesn't want us to get hurt. So sometimes we might feel so angry we could kill. And very often we can't help that. We can help the not killing, but not the feeling of anger. But it's what we do that really matters. Because whenever we harbor anger in our heart, wherever we refuse to forgive or refuse to reconcile, the life that really is in danger is our own.